There's a lot of nonsense flying around about this game right now, and none of it is anything like what I played, so I just wanted to talk about my own experience and what I got out of it. We've got critics calling it flawless, and we've got users basically saying that it's an absolute dumpster fire, and well, who do you believe as a consumer? Truth be told, it's my opinion that you should look to the people whose opinions you personally trust and value. Look toward individual people that have similar tastes to you and that you know are going to give you a genuine recommendation. Personally, I highly recommend this game, but with a few warnings. It's been 7 years since the first one, so there's been plenty of time to form your own ideas of what a sequel could or even should be. I will admit that I did not get the game that I wanted, but that's not what matters. Me getting what I wanted is not indicative of the quality of what I got. This game is incredibly ambitious and creative as a sequel to one of the most beloved games of the modern era, so my first warning is, if you're gonna play this game, you've got to be ready to experience a story that is crafted around the characters involved, and not necessarily what will make players fall in love with it. It will not pander to you just because you love the first one. It is unforgiving and brutal, and there will be points where it's going to be tough to get through at first, but you've just got to do it. It'll make you question the development team and the writers and ask how could anything like this happen, but please believe me when I say that it's been crafted that way specifically. If it's hard to get through and you just hate everything that's happening, it's likely because you're supposed to. Please just stick with it to the very end, see the credits, and then after that, let it sit for a full day and just think about everything that happened. And try and think about why everything happened from the character's perspective and not from your own as a player, and especially not in comparison to your own expectations. Just to round up the basics before we get into spoiler territory, it's graphically stunning. I ran it on a regular launch PS4 and the poor thing sounded like it was 2 seconds away from taking off down the runway, but it was worth it. The settings are gorgeous and wonderfully depict nature taking hold after humanity's collapse. I can confidently say that this is the first game where the characters' faces aren't taking a hike through the uncanny valley and actually effectively emote, at least as far as I've experienced. Mechanically, it's very similar, but not identical to the first one. There's a lot of small improvements that go a long way in helping carry the game through its longer runtime. I'm not willing to discuss anything beyond this without getting into spoilers, so if you're interested in playing the game, I recommend heading out now. But if you've already played it and would like a more in-depth breakdown, please stick around. One of the main ideas that I got from this game is that it's a game about people, their decisions, and the consequences of those decisions on all parties involved, as well as the ruthless delivery of those consequences regardless of who's being affected. It takes a more visceral and real perspective as opposed to over-dramatizing certain events. The events happen as they happen, and it's up to the player to realize the impact that the events have. The way that Naughty Dog chose to end Joel's story is ballsy, brutal, shocking, tragic, and heart-wrenching. But I think it was effective in its purpose and was therefore well written. Not every death has to be glorious, and honestly to me, it felt more real the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it, except seek revenge on those responsible, and this gives Ellie clear motivation. That being said, it's important to mention why Joel was killed in the first place. The entire game is undoubtedly a direct consequence of Joel's actions in the hospital. Joel made a selfish decision to kill an innocent surgeon, and possibly the last person alive capable of saving humanity, and take Ellie away from that hospital, killing anyone in the way. Even the leader of the Fireflies, the organization that commissioned him to deliver Ellie there in the first place. He betrayed them to save Ellie, and in saving Ellie, he betrayed her trust and took away what she believed to be her life's purpose. In The Last of Us Part 1, we saw a cleverly crafted redemption arc, hidden away within the journey and bond of a father who was gifted with a second chance at having a daughter. We watched as he turned from a ruthless survivor into a protector. We watched him pass on knowledge and create good memories with Ellie. We saw the story of love and compassion, of a man regaining his humanity and becoming good again. And at the end of that arc, we saw that Joel was willing to do anything to not lose his daughter again. He did whatever it took. We as players get to see his redemption, but we didn't get to see the aftermath that it left behind. So when Abby ruthlessly tortures and bludgeons him to death, it is tragic, and I hated Abby for it, but it serves as the perfect catalyst to make me want to hunt her down no matter what it took. But on the other hand, all things considered, from Abby's perspective, he got what he deserved. For killing her father, ruining an entire organization and their ideology, and essentially dooming the world. Everyone's the protagonist of their own story. First and foremost, the first 15 hours alone could be a satisfying sequel to the first one, as long as it had some minor tweaks. If it ended when Abby confronted Ellie in the theater, it would have been a satisfying enough conclusion for me. My god, there is so much to unpackage in just this portion of the game. Now is as good a time as any to mention that the gameplay evolved minimally, but enough to keep it interesting. The improvements made in the stealth system, as well as the restructuring of battle set pieces, make it feel like there are dozens of possibilities on how you can approach and conquer a situation. Encounters are now much larger than they were before, often taking up sprawling portions of land, and including many different environments like water sections that involve diving to help you sneak through undetected, heavily wooded areas that have thick sections of undergrowth, and even a sense of added verticality. The resource management is similar, as well as how you obtain the ingredients, and I'd say that that's the weakest part personally. You can only open so many drawers before you get sick of being reminded that you're already full up. On the plus side, there are difficulty options that are specifically tailored to each aspect of the game so that you can rebalance it yourself if you feel something's amiss. I felt that the pacing of the gameplay itself was done wonderfully. One of the first areas you explore in Seattle is the open world downtown. I for one love Naughty Dog's approach to the classic RPG trope of making players move between question marks on the map. You start with one clear goal, and along the way, through true exploration, discover intel about other places of interest. And the question marks are only a tool to help Ellie keep track of where they've been and where they could go, because they're in a completely foreign environment. Finally, someone has developed an area to be explored naturally, made it rewarding, made it logical, and didn't drag it out. I'm looking over at you, Odyssey. I was originally sad that this was the only time this kind of area shows up in the game, and then it dawned on me. The structure of the game complements the pacing. Shit has not yet hit the fan, so Ellie and Dina get to take their time and explore Seattle. This section lets you gain some footing and some comfort because, oh boy, it's gonna go bad real quick and it's not gonna stop. Before you know it, your horse explodes, you're captured, Dina saves you, and you get the feeling that you were never really that safe in the first place. Just really lucky. From this point on, we return to the sense of brutal, unforgiving reality. People are being tortured and hanged around you. Every enemy you kill has a name that their comrades, friends, and significant others call out in despair as they let out blood-curdling screams while they bleed to death from a lost limb. A limb that you took by specifically aiming for it. Blood spurts out of sliced necks as you rampage your way across Seattle in search of anyone who will point you in Abby's direction. You feel like every kill matters in some small sense of the word. In this world, they're just people. The fact that they have names implies that they have lives of their own, and every death could start a new cycle of violence like the one that began when Joel left the hospital. I found that the pacing of this section was incredible, because as soon as I was used to doing whatever I was doing, I found myself being presented with something new that threw a huge wrench in the whole situation. As soon as you get used to fighting the wolves, you get overrun and chased into some tunnels, overrun with infected. And as soon as you get used to fighting the infected, they introduce the Shambler that forces you to completely change your strategy because they can't be stealth killed. The combination of enemies, Shamblers that need to be killed with munitions, Flickers that are most effectively dealt with stealthily, and regular infected that group up on you and distract you from the bigger threats when you've made your presence known, create an incredible balancing act of how you should approach a situation. And on top of all this, WLF is still hunting you through the tunnels and your mask breaks, forcing you to reveal your secret to Dina, which completely messes up her day. And finally, the second you've been given a moment's respite from this non-stop descent into chaos, Dina tells you she's pregnant. Seattle Day 1 is a long fucking day. And Day 2 doesn't let up either. Ellie ventures out alone to the town of Hillcrest chasing a lead on Tommy. In classic fashion, as soon as I was used to the game and felt a little too comfortable, they took away my partner, forcing me to adapt to a lack of call-outs and assisted kills. Once again, changing up the experience and keeping me on my toes. Another aspect of Hillcrest that's important to mention is the world building that occurs through the notes left by its residents and the payoff in the end. As you get used to going it alone, the game gives you bits of a small story that happened in this town about an archer named Boris and another cycle of violence that started when the WLF gunned down his daughter. Boris retaliated, but his neighbors attempted to turn him in, but before they could, he infected them all with spores and locked them in a garage. In the process, he was bitten, and he locked himself away. All of a sudden, a random group of infected, and one that happens to have a bow and arrow, have been given a greater meaning through context and the inclusion of these notes. Eventually, Ellie finds Jesse, and together they escape to the theater, and, well, that's just Ellie's morning. Venturing back out, she travels across the city again to find Nora. At this point, you're pretty comfortable being alone and hunting the WLF. Well, just kind of go ahead and throw that out the window. You're attacked at a workbench by deserters, so that doesn't get to feel safe anymore, and then there's the stalkers. Holy shit. The instant that I was confident in my ability to deal with the infected, they take away the effectiveness of my listening mechanic, making that section one of the most terrifying experiences that I've had in recent years. And then on top of that, you encounter the Seraphites, who fight more similarly to you as a player, and whose tactics are completely foreign. And just like that, they've taken away your safe spaces, and the hunter becomes the hunted by both humans and infected alike. And finally, making your way to the hospital and tracking down Nora, you're forced to use the last advantage you have left. Your immunity, effectively dooming Nora, and when she refuses to talk, Ellie does to Nora what Abby did to Joel. And she made her talk, even though it scarred her. As the chapter closes, we see the effect that just 2 days has had on Ellie. She is damaged and visibly running herself into the ground in pursuit of Abby, but she just doesn't stop. On the final day, Ellie and Jesse go out once more to follow a lead on Abby, hoping to find Tommy so that they can just return home safely while they still can. Early on, there's a fork in the road, and Ellie is presented with the means to hunt Abby, and with the means to aid Tommy. And she goes against her own word to Jesse from earlier that day and hunts down Abby on her own, and once again, as soon as I felt familiar and comfortable, they switched it up on me with the inclusion of underwater stealth and the use of a boat. This boat allows you to traverse the rapids that run through the city streets and eventually to the aquarium. And because Ellie can't seem to catch a break, there's a torrential storm, she encounters a bloater, and as soon as she gets to Puget Sound and can see the aquarium a stone's throw away, her boat stops working, and she has to swim through the tide and crashing waves. If it wasn't clear already, this game beats the ever-loving shit out of Ellie. After infiltrating the aquarium, Ellie finds it ominously empty. The only inhabitants are a German Shepherd, Owen, and Mel. In a failed attempt to use an interrogation tactic that Joel told Ellie and that Tommy used earlier, she shoots Owen and stabs Mel in the throat. Enough time had passed that I forgot Mel was pregnant, and I was just as shocked as Ellie when Owen told her as he bled out. And throughout all this, we have periodic flashbacks to Ellie's time with Joel that offer some much-needed time with Troy Baker, and some much-needed good memories for Ellie to have in this time of chaos and rage.
Be worried about as well.
This is the point in the story that has people the most divided. For me, if the game ended in the theater, altering the events there, of course, to make it a more satisfying conclusion, I would have been happy. At this point, I'd been playing for the same amount of time that I did in The Last of Us Part 1. There have been interesting, although sparse innovations in the combat and stealth mechanics. The pacing was incredible and kept me hooked once it got going, and for me, the narrative was well written and well executed. It detailed Ellie's descent into almost obsessive and borderline suicidal tendencies in her reckless pursuit of Abby, losing her humanity, and putting her friends in danger to hunt the person that took everything from her. For me, this is the point where I would say there's been enough violence. Abby took Joel and Jesse, and Ellie killed all of Abby's friends and dozens of members of her organization. I think we could have seen Ellie realize what she's become, and say that she's had enough and settle down on a farm with Dina and have a second chance at happiness.
Hey, I'll take him.
Now just hold on for a second. I'm not saying that this would have been a better or even a good ending, but what I am saying is that if it ended that way then and there, I would have been okay with it because everything up until that point made it a satisfying sequel for me. I'm also saying that an ending like that may have gone over better than what they chose to do instead. At the peak of the tension that they've been building for the entire game thus far, they hard cut to Abby's perspective. For 8 hours. That may be the hardest pill to swallow of the entire game. And if I'm being honest, I was upset with the game's direction for about 3 of those 8 hours. The game almost completely resets everything. All your weapons, upgrades, and skills are gone and replaced with completely new and different ones. It is ambitious, but incredibly hard to adjust to. I mean, you just lost all your hard-earned progress and are forced to play as the character you've been hating, and there is no end in sight. This is where the gameplay innovations more or less failed to deliver. The amount of improvement was enough to support Ellie's story, but not really enough to carry Abby's as well. I even completely changed my playstyle to put it to the test. I threw stealth out the window and decided to put the whole new arsenal to the test in all-out combat and embody the Goliath that I was forced to play as. And it worked for a little while, but it quickly became bland and certainly didn't help me get through the shock from the transition from Ellie to Abby. Narratively speaking, putting Abby's story here was almost necessary in retrospect. Abby's decision to let Ellie go would make absolutely no sense without context, and why the fuck is this kid here? So instead of cutting it off there, and pretty much making a standard revenge plot where you go after some mini-bosses and then the big bad, they chose something far more creative and unorthodox. At this point, I realized you're supposed to hate Abby by design. I mean, that's the point of the game. And a lot of players seem to think that as you play her side of the story, that you're supposed to do a 180 on her and think of her as the protagonist. This is not my interpretation at all. I don't think you're supposed to think she's the good guy in all this, or even supposed to agree with her justifications for her actions. You're not supposed to like her friends as much as you like the side characters associated with Joel and Ellie. You're meant to just view her side and understand her motivations. They attempt to humanize the character that has been demonized the entire time. They don't try and make you like her. The point of her section is to show a mirrored arc. As Ellie loses her humanity, Abby regains hers after what she'd done, resulting in Abby making the decision to let Ellie go, even though she'd killed all of her friends and practically everyone that was important to her. Abby's got her own shit going on without Ellie, and her whole section is solely her own journey that runs parallel in terms of setting and time frame to Ellie's, and in more of a metaphorical and structural term, to Joel's. We get to see Abby's reasons for killing Joel. And I can't say I blame her. They show Abby's interpersonal relationships with all of her friends that came to Jackson and how they react to what happened there. They show the camaraderie that she has with Manny and the distrust between her and Mel about the events of Jackson. You see the relationship that was built up between her and Owen from their time in Salt Lake going forward. You see that when Isaac wouldn't let her go find Owen, that she showed where her allegiances lie by turning her back on the WLF and going AWOL. She even sees that the conflict with the Seraphites is not as straightforward as it seems when Lev and Yara rescue her. She helps them because she starts to feel the need to grow and be better. As Owen put it, they've taken so many lives in pursuit of land that they don't give two shits about. And even her friends no longer see Abby as the same person after Jackson. Finally, we watch as Lev is taken under Abby's wing, and as she tries to become a good mentor, she learns compassion from him. He shows her that she doesn't have to be the same person that she once was, and even helps change her for the better by helping her overcome her fear of heights. Abby teaches Lev more of the world, and Lev teaches her a different path through his experiences and beliefs as a Seraphite. Through Abby's want to change, she protects Lev, knowing that he's innocent and good-hearted by going so far as to kill her former commander and storm into hostile territory after Lev attempts to save his mother. The idea that Abby redeems herself and regains her humanity while on a journey with an adolescent that she takes under her wing directly parallels Joel's arc in The Last of Us Part 1, partly because of Abby's connection to Lev and partly because of the parallel between Dina and Mel's pregnancy. Abby decides to end the cycle of violence. She's seen enough, and she's done enough, and won't contribute to it anymore. Joel brought what happened to him on himself, but Abby brought ruin on everyone that she cared about in the form of Ellie. So she makes the tough decision and lets Ellie go. And if I got anything from Abby's act, I got a way more interesting and developed villain, and a way more creative and narrative that, in retrospect, added to my personal experience of the game. Once again, I thought the game would be ending. I sat on that tractor, looking out over the sprawling landscape of Wyoming, holding Dina's child as my own, and I finally had a tiny bit of peace. I was just waiting for credits to roll. But they never came. I was glad to be getting more game to experience, but I was really ready for things to wrap up. I thought that Ellie saw that she and Abby were even and that they both lost. I thought Ellie saw that she had a good thing going and a happy ending, even after everything that happened in Seattle. But this was the end that Dina wanted. She got her family and her farm that she talked about. Ellie was still plagued by Joel's death and just couldn't let it go. Even though her last crusade cost Jesse everything and almost cost Tommy his life, she had to see it through for her own peace of mind. And in another baffling decision to me, she sets off for Santa Barbara in what feels like an epilogue, even though it takes up a decent portion of the game. This whole chapter felt unnecessary. Maybe we could keep the portion of Abby and Lev getting word from the Fireflies as a nice little beat to end her story, but everything that happens after this just feels pointless to me. It feels like a forced continuation. Abby's arc could have concluded with her being the bigger person and letting Ellie go. Dina's arc did end when she got her happy ending. Ellie's arc could have ended by her realizing what she had become in her reckless pursuit of vengeance, realizing what it cost to everyone around her, and realizing how much she had actually taken from Abby. But the story just keeps going, and for me it felt like it left a wave of underdevelopment in its wake. Out of sheer necessity that stems from the fact that we are in a drastically different place, we introduce a whole new group of survivors called the Rattlers. I mean, who are they? What are their ideals? Why have they taken Abby? And these questions are glaring for a game that cared so much about the interactions between different groups of people. You know, like Abby's Fireflies and the group from Jackson, or even the differing ideologies of the WLF and the Seraphites. They feel like a speed bump to pad the playtime for just a little longer, or maybe even to make this section feel a little more necessary than it actually was. They do offer a small amount of combat innovation. They're the only group that features body armor, and they give you a suppressed SMG. In a nice twist, in addition to slave labor, I might add they chain up infected inside their camps. This sets up interesting scenarios that allow you to release the infected and incite chaos in their ranks. Even though these additions are appreciated and serve to make the final 2 or 3 hours more interesting mechanically, they do little to help the overall feeling of why the fuck is this game still going? It could have ended twice now. Before we get into my major issue with the game, I want to say that I really enjoyed playing this for the most part. And the parts that I didn't enjoy, I at least appreciated in retrospect because they added to the experience in the end. But that kind of leads into the biggest issue. The writing is so reliant that the player will make it to the end of the game. Let me explain. There are several instances where I just didn't understand the characters' motivations or the meta-narrative choices Naughty Dog was making until everything finally comes full circle in the last act of the game. And this happens to a degree that, in retrospect, some details feel artificially inserted just to make the narrative structure fall into place. I'm going to start with the major exceptions that I have to this before we dive in. I understand Abby's motivation to kill Joel, as well as her motivation to seek the Fireflies in the final act. I understand Ellie's and Tommy's motivation to go to Seattle. I also understand Owen's motivation to abandon the WLF and search the Fireflies, as well as Mel's reasons to follow him, but only if Abby doesn't. There's even a few things that I'm willing to explain away on my own with context. For instance, why did Joel and Tommy trust Abby enough to give their names even though they are incredibly seasoned survivors? My personal explanation is that Abby and Joel just worked together to escape a horde and Abby offered a safe haven. Also, Joel's been in Jackson for 4 years. As far as we know, through Ellie's and Dina's dialogue at least, Jackson's a pretty welcoming place where you aren't shot on sight at the front gate, and the entire community comes together to keep people safe. This was enough context for me personally to rationalize Joel being caught off guard for just long enough for Abby to get the upper hand and quickly cripple him. Like I said, it's enough context for me, personally. I don't think that the way he was killed was an insult to his character. It felt like a visceral catalyst to jumpstart the story. I understand that others feel differently, but I personally disagree. Another decision that I was able to rationalize is why Ellie is extremely cruel with Nora, but lets Abby live. I think that by the time we get to Nora, so much shit has gone down for Ellie. Day 1 is a long fucking day, where shit is consistently and continuously hitting the fan, and then day 2 just keeps it going. If I were Ellie, I'd be done. Not to mention, Nora was the last lead that she had, and it took everything to get to her. She had to essentially use her immunity as a weapon to even have a chance. And then after all this, she still wouldn't talk, so she took a page out of Tommy's and Joel's handbook, as well as essentially reenacting what Abby had done until she got what she wanted. The reason that she didn't kill Abby in Santa Barbara is likely because enough time had passed that Ellie wouldn't be as filled with pure rage anymore. This is in addition to the idea that Ellie already has her beaten from the start. Abby was slowly being killed out there on those poles. But even as Ellie's threatening to kill her, she won't fight until Ellie threatens Lev. To me, The vision that Ellie has of Joel while she's choking Abby to death signifies that she has realized what she's become in pursuit of vengeance for a person that definitely wouldn't never want to see Ellie that way. I think she herself saw the parallels between her and Abby's stories and finally decided enough was enough. Like I said, this is my own rationalization, and I understand if you disagree, but I personally believe that there is enough details and support that it can't be fully discounted outright. There are some character motivations that I think are weakly defined and can't reasonably justify. I don't know why Dina would come along to Seattle if she thought she was pregnant, and was only dating Ellie for what seems like an afternoon prior to their departure. And perhaps even more undefined is why Jesse's there at all. Maybe both can be explained by the idea that they bonded through their time in Jackson. Maybe Jesse went after Dina. I don't know. I also felt that Abby's connection to Yara and Lev was a little unreasonable. A rather large portion of her section is dedicated to the storyline that stems from the night that they all saved each other. There is major characterization for Abby happening during the events that follow, but even the characters question on why she's risking so much for two scars that she just met, and for me it felt a little too forced, only for it to pay off in the end. This brings us to the idea of the overall narrative structure. As you play, the game feels like three separate games. Ellie's part, Abby's part, and Santa Barbara. Two parts that feel distinct and one part that doesn't seem to belong. It isn't until the final showdown that you realize why they made the writing choices that they did. They start Abby's part in the middle because the theater showdown wouldn't make any sense without it. Abby goes to Santa Barbara for her own reasons, and Ellie goes because she can't let Abby go. At every major turning point, Naughty Dog felt that it was necessary for us to understand both Abby's and Ellie's reasoning. They draw parallels between Ellie's ruthlessness and Abby's actions against Joel by making Ellie transform into a brutal murderer that would do anything to achieve her goal. They draw a parallel between Abby's redemption and Joel's redemption, as they both do whatever it takes to protect the one that helped them bring back their humanity. These details feel well done to me and helped portray the idea of cycles of revenge. What doesn't feel well done are the parallels drawn by people that lacked convincing motivation. The fact that Dina was pregnant felt very out of place to me when it was first brought up, and felt absolutely forced when we see that it is almost exclusively used to connect her and Mel. Also, Jesse felt like he was shoved in there just to get domed, and even out the body count difference between Ellie and Abby. My experience with The Last of Us Part 2 was overall very positive. I think that the story really is about people and how their decisions affect the overall story, even if those decisions sometimes feel forced and unnatural. In an experience that takes 25 plus hours to complete, Naughty Dog is asking a lot out of the player to trust their writing process, but I think it pays off more times than it doesn't. They were incredibly ambitious in their goal of not giving us the same old revenge plot we've seen a million times, but instead giving us a more complicated, albeit harder to swallow, story that shows that everyone has their own motivations, and that antagonists aren't explicitly evil. Most of the meta-narrative decisions in this game are written to make sense for what each character will do, and not what would make the most dramatic story. For the most part, I think they succeeded in delivering a satisfying sequel overall. Since the score seems to waver between 10 out of 10, implying the game is flawless, and like a 2 out of 10, implying it's a barely functioning game, I'll give my personal score and my personal reasons behind it, that are based on the individual sections of the game and how much of the overall game those sections took up. I hope that this cleared up some misconceptions, and that maybe showed you should actually play the game before you just assume the worst. So, thanks for watching.